Welcome everybody to the American Space Museum, where we bring you weekdays a program to help you stay curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and beside me is the legend Hugh Harris, the voice of the Space Shuttle program for NASA. Hugh, welcome to Stay Curious.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. We both have Stay Curious masks on, and we're going to take them off now. We've got this barrier here between us, and COVID's safe, and Mr. Harris has agreed to that. And we're just so glad to have you with us. And you're 35 years you've been with NASA, and you're going to tell some of the fun stories of running the public relations office.
Well, it's really 58 years that I've been with NASA.
Okay.
But I'll tell you about that later.
All right. Okay, great. And we're going to enjoy a great conversation with Hugh Harris here, who's better known as the voice of NASA during the Space Shuttle era. So he has seen the triumph and tragedy of our American space program as an eyewitness to history, a reporter involved with all of our seminal moments in space history, Hugh. And looking back on it, what a legacy, huh? What a 50-year legacy for our country, right?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's the most important thing, really, that we had going during the time that I've been alive. Well,
and me too, most certainly. But we're going to, Hugh, we've got a couple little things that we've done here on Stay Curious. Believe it or not, we're in our 27th week of bringing this program during the COVID pandemic to reach out and let people know we're a proud Brevard County nonprofit. We're struggling through this pandemic. It closed us for 6 months, and we lost over $50,000 in income.
Wow.
So you have been responding by giving us plenty of these, and of course we need bushel baskets full of $100 bills to keep our humble nonprofit open that celebrates the birth of the space age. So, and this is a gentleman that reported all of these events, and we can't wait to get that into that history with you. But thank you for supporting us. Go to our website, americanspacemuseum.org, and there's very convenient ways to donate. Become a member for $25. And even if you don't come here, the money will be well spent on keeping our nonprofit open. Stay Curious was born out of the pandemic, and we enjoy celebrating things like National Hispanic Month. And there's 13 astronauts, Hugh, that were Latin Hispanic. And we've featured 9 of them. We got 4 more to go. We'll probably do those tomorrow. But all interesting people. And one of them is Carlos Noriega, who's celebrating his 61st birthday today. Hugh, we love celebrating shuttle astronaut birthdays. Of course, the Gemini and Apollo guys are still around too. But what an important part of America's history that you were part of. And, you know, these men and women of our shuttle sometimes go into obscurity. You know, I always say, Hugh, 565 humans have been in space since Yuri Gagarin. What a small number compared to the billions and billions of people born in 6 decades.
That's right.
And here's one of them right there, a great guy. He did some of the hard hat work in the space shuttle. Born in, let me get the facts here on Carlos Noriega. Born in Lima, Peru on October 8th, 59. He's a U.S. citizen, a U.S. Marine. Hoorah to you Marines out there. And he grew up in Santa Clara, California. Had 2 shuttle missions, STS-84 in Atlantis. He went to the Mir Space Station in 1997. And then he did the 5th Hard Hat ISS mission, putting up solar rays on 3 EVAs. So happy 61st birthday to Carlos Noriega there, one of our shuttle heroes. And then the other thing we like to do, Hugh, that we talked about earlier, was we love celebrating who's up in the air this date in history. And we've got 3 space shuttles, a couple you were involved with. Let's talk about, with Mr. Hugh Harris, STS-41G, where they had those crazy fiscal year was the 4, and the 1 was Kennedy, and G was A, B, C, D, about that many in order. But when I showed you this picture, you mentioned these are some of your good guys that you wrote about. This was the mission, the first mission that had 7 astronauts. Look at there. There's a pass to your press site, we're going
Right.
to talk about that he was over the press site. And there's another one, a pass that goes to the Cape Canaveral Air Base Station there. The kinds of things that we have in our stuff here at the American Space Museum, and we bundle these in a package with a decal, maybe a press kit that you put together and sell them for $30 or $40 on
Wow.
eBay. Where else are you going to find stuff like this, right? And it supports our nonprofit. So love showing those type of things. STS, and we talk about what the mission was about, and I said, Hugh Harris, you probably wrote the press release on this. The first mission with 6 crew members, the first flight of a Canadian payload specialist, Mark Garnow. Garnow? Seven. Yeah, 7 astronauts. Yeah, thanks, Marty. 7 astronauts. Sally Ride and Catherine Sullivan made 2 women for the first time in space. Kathy Sullivan did the first American spacewalk by a woman. Cripp was the first astronaut to fly the 4 shuttle missions. And interestingly, they demonstrated satellite refueling techniques and the first flight with a reentry profile crossing the eastern USA. You probably had to dig that one out in your press release there. So we celebrate them in space in 1984. And then in where's my cheat sheet here? In 84 and then 90, we had STS-41. And that is Bob Cabana's first flight. By the way, going back to Bob Crippen here, Bob Crippen was the KSC director when Hugh Harris was appointed the public relations director, right?
Yes, and that's why he's one of my favorite directors.
Right. I'll bet. So, yep. And we had Jay Honeycutt on here about a month ago and had a great time with Jay talking about motorcycles up on pad 39A and fishing in the retention pond out there.
Well, he was probably the most fun type,
Was he?
but also the one that you could not guess what was going to happen next.
Oh, is that right? Well, that's his Louisiana heritage, I think. We got talking about being a Cajun, and we'll talk. But anyway, yeah, Cripp, your friend there, 1990, we had STS-41 in space, and then in STS-112 was 2002, 2 women again in space, okay. That's kind of interesting. I didn't think of it that way, Marty, that we, on this date in history, you got 2 women flying together on a shuttle. That's got to be very interesting. So this was another hard hat mission, finishing stuff on the space station. Our heroes in space, 3 shuttles going on right now. And then we had news yesterday where Chris Ferguson, the commander of the last space shuttle, STS-135 in July 2011, was going to be the commander of the Boeing Starliner's first crewed flight, and he has stepped down, and Butch Wilmer is now going to be the commander. And as I told you yesterday, we looked up on Butch. Butch has spent 170 days in space. He was on I think, Expedition 41, a very seasoned astronaut, a bunch of EVAs under his belt. Boeing's in good hands with Butch Wilmer, I think. And Chris Ferguson, I think they're both 59 years old. Chris Ferguson said some family situations and a difficult decision. He's still going to be over the crewed flight in a capacity with Boeing as a management guy. So we love talking about stuff like that, Hugh. And once again, I welcome everybody to our Stay Curious program with our special guest here, Hugh Harris. Hugh, I'll give a little of your biography and then we'll turn us loose on this. Of course, it's a very honor for me to have this gentleman here. As I've told you many times, I'm a journalist, work for several newspapers and the Associated Press as a photographer. And so we're kind of kindred spirits. And of the 5 kind of voices of NASA up to his era, and I've got pictures of 4 of them here, 3 of them are from Ohio. And I'm a Buckeye, so Hugh's from Cleveland. And you started your career as an information specialist at the Lewis Research Center in 1963 in Cleveland. and then you were promoted to the chief of the public relation office up there, and you can tell us a little about that. You came to KSC in 1975, so, but like you said, you were involved in all the programs going back and forth. In 1985, you became deputy director of the public affairs office under the gentleman that I apologize, I omitted Chuck Hollinsmith on this here as one of the KSC.
Hollinshead.
Pardon me?
Hollinshead.
Hollinshead, yeah. Oh, Hollinshead. Okay, thank you for that correction. Hollinshead. So I need to redo this, and we'll have a program on that one day. And then in 1992, Bob Crippen named you the public affairs director, and basically to the right of, I'm going to have our, we have to the right of Hugh there, Marty Winkles, our cameraman. I didn't give a shout out to Marty. And Marty, pan over there a little bit to Hugh, and to his right is the press site that you were over, Hugh, with the clock in the right-hand corner, and up there is the there's a bird on the pad up there, and I'm going to get up and not to point it out there to you here. Here's the shuttle on pad 39A. Here's the press site. We're going to show a couple more pictures of that. There's the famous clock right there. And this is where Mr. Hugh Harris, that was one of your offices out there, right?
Right.
And in charge of all the media out there. And Bubb, before our program, talking about some of the old school media guys of the Apollo era, we had a hard time remembering Frank Reynolds of NBC, and you had Frank Reynolds, and on of course Walter Cronkite was CBS, and ABC was Jules Bergman. NBC was also your friend and excellent writer Jay Barbary, and we're going to talk about Jay Barbary here in a little bit too. But Hugh, I'm going to turn you loose. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the media game as a Buckeye in Ohio there.
Well, I'd not been out of a job since I was 14 for more than 1 week.
Oh, great.
And that 1 week was when I got out of the Army.
All right.
So I, really started working for money when I was about 7 or 8, and have had various jobs ever since then. But going into the era of working for the news media happened sort of as a surprise to even me, because I originally wanted to be a nuclear physicist, but I couldn't get a scholarship to study nuclear physics, but I could get one to study speech and dramatic arts. And so in college at Western Reserve University, that's where I started. But because I had to work full-time all the time, I was 1 hour under full-time at college, and the draft board came along and said, you better decide if you would like to go to any other branch of the service, because we're going to draft you in another week or so. So
Oh, man.
I ended up there. But prior to that, during, junior high and then high school, I did a lot of radio work.
Oh, okay.
And so I became very interested in the news area, although that wasn't what I was doing at the time. And while I was in the Army, when I got sent to Germany, I ended up making radio programs for the Army in Germany. So when I came back, I had a pretty good resume of things I could do in that particular area. So when I ran out of money in graduate school, I looked for jobs and got a job with a radio station in New Jersey, WMTR in Morristown, New Jersey. And then went to 2 newspapers in New Jersey because they paid more than the radio station, and then went from there back to Cleveland and went to work for Standard Oil of Ohio as a writer. And unfortunately, I got there just a year before a massive layoff of a couple thousand people. And at the time, I applied to NASA and to the Federal Reserve Bank. And NASA was very slow in making a decision. The Federal Reserve Bank offered me a job almost immediately. And I said, well, I would really rather work for NASA. And because I think it's the most important thing happening in our slice of the civilization.
Now, this is the early 1960s, right?
This is 63.
Okay.
And so I went to work at the Lewis Research Center, which is now the John Glenn Research
Right,
Center.
up on the shores of Lake Erie.
In Cleveland. And so ever since then, I have worked for NASA until I theoretically retired. But before I retired, I had the foresight to start a volunteer program for retirees. And so I thought, after persuading about 100 people to get to do volunteer work, I thought I'd better do it too. So I'm still a volunteer out at the center.
Oh, you're great.
In the press area.
Super, super. We wish they'd get cranked back up. Hugh, you know, I wanted to mention we're here in our gallery of the shuttle. This is C3 in the launch control behind you, Hugh, recreated here. We do have a 10-minute loop going on of the space shuttle launching and landing. It's actually 133, Discovery's last mission, the great orbiter that OV-103 was, Discovery. And so what do you think of our complex here that we set up? Bring back some memories?
Yes, I think it's great. I think the American Space Museum has done a fantastic job in gathering together a lot of unusual memorabilia of the space program, which is not easy.
Where else are you going to get a button of STS-41G here, like I've got, huh? Exactly.
Well,
just that's kind of the cheat, but I appreciate what you're saying. We do, and when I found this place 3 years ago, it's just amazing, the one of a kind and stuff that literally saved from landfills. There's just no other way to put it. Is here in our museum, right?
Well, it's terribly important, actually, to the history of the country, and I think that what you're doing here is really important to keeping young people in particular, but also older people, informed about what the role is that NASA has played in the life of America and the world, for that matter, because it's, as I mentioned before, probably the most important thing that's been happening. But it also, I think, the philosophy that was behind the formation of NASA and the NACA before that is a template for the way that everybody should think about their lives.
Well, that's and that's care for each other and look out for each other, right? Like launching humans into space.
Right, and to build on improving the life of everybody on Earth, and that is really what has happened with all of the things that NASA has done, and also has spread throughout the world as a result of that. But we can talk more about the philosophy behind NAC and NASA, if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah. Those you don't know, the National Aeronautic Council Administration, is that the
National Aeronautics
Council?
No, not council.
National
Now that you said that.
Yeah, National Aeronautics, C is for
Committee on Aeronautics.
Committee on Aeronautics.
Yeah.
That started in 1915, 12 years after the Wright brothers.
Right. National Aeronautics Administration, National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics. And the purpose of that was...
National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA, was morphed into the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in 1960.
58.
58, I'm sorry, yeah, 58. So from 1915 to 58, the NACA was over all of aviation and this infant rocketry going
Right.
on.
Well, the philosophy that evolved from that was started with the fact that this country was way behind the rest of the world in aeronautics at the beginning of World War I. And despite the fact that we'd had the first heavier-than aircraft flying with the Wright brothers, and the President and Congress and everybody recognized that something needed to be done to catch up. And informing that was done in a way that the technology would get out to the regular companies, because it's the private companies in this country who actually do the work, that create the products that is used throughout both this country and the world, for that matter. But from the very beginning, rather than building an arsenal, which is what the Department of Defense usually did, where all of the technology stayed sort of within the confines of the Department of Defense, they immediately brought in private industry and did the work or sponsored the work that was not economically viable for private industry to do. But as a result of doing that, that technology was available to companies all over this country. Well, the same thing happened in NASA. Again, you have the government, in this case, switching to the space area, and actually NACA had actually gotten us started in that area. But the whole philosophy, again, was that it's the government's job to do what needs to be done in the basic research area until it becomes economically feasible for private industry, and then turn it over to private industry. And what you see happening with SpaceX and other companies now is a continuation of that. So so I'm really proud of what SpaceX has accomplished, but the fact that the technology has continued to make this country the strongest technologically in the world, and also economically the strongest. And it's really because that knowledge that's being created is not kept in a box somewhere that's used only by a particular branch of the government, but has flowed out. And that's why, you know, there are millions of spin-offs in the private industry has been able to, you know, bring to market and improve the the lives of everybody in this country and on Earth.
Well put. What insight there from Hugh Harris, a 4-decade career at NASA as the Director of Public Affairs. You have talked to senators, presidents, all kinds of people from all walks of life, right?
Well, true.
True. And how when you look back and you're retired and you look back at that sort of thing, how does it all fit together? Is it like you said, these people were all, you're involved with people that want to explore our solar system and beyond?
Well, people are what it's all about.
Yes, sir.
And I don't, I think that every single person that has worked in the, worked for NASA, worked in the space industry, is important, starting from the janitor that sweeps the floor, because each one contributes something to making it all possible. And, I would have liked to have been a top scientist who invented lots of things, but instead I got to actually work with all of those top scientists and engineers, and
well, you're the communicator for them, which is not easy to boil down astrophysics to a 1,000-word story about this satellite that's going to go on the shuttle. Am I right? So
well, that's true, and also we don't really know where everything is going necessarily when we're developing something. For instance, the NASA works very closely with the Department of Defense and with other agencies on solving problems, as well as on the NASA program. And an example that I like to use, which I've had a chance to watch it come to fruition at the Lewis Research Center, has to do with a problem that the military was having with their helicopters that had to be used in desert areas. And helicopters are really big fans, and they pick up a lot of dust and sand and all that sort of thing. Well, that was wearing out the bearings on the rotors, and so the lifetime of the bearings that were used for that was greatly reduced by the use it was doing. And they came to NASA and said, this is a problem, and do you have anything that can help us solve that? Well, what ended up happening was not so much looking at how do you build a housing so the sand can't get in or other things can't get in, because that already had been done and didn't work very well. What happened in the basic research was looking at the ratio of hardness between the bearings, either the roller bearings or ball bearings, and the races that they were in. And it turns out that the ratio that you have of hardness there determines what the life of the bearing will be. Now that technology is in every car, and anybody who's worked on old cars knows that bearings are a problem on the wheels and have to be changed periodically. Well, you don't find that happening very much on the cars that have been made.
No, you don't.
In the 60s going forward, and it's because of a research project that was done looking at helicopters that got transferred very quickly, not only to cars, but anything that has bearings in it. And that's only one of thousands and thousands of advances that have been made possible.
Mm-hmm. And I'll bet you have written thousands and thousands of stories on NASA spin-offs.
Well, I've written quite a few.
Yeah, I've written quite a few.
And there's probably more in the medical area than any other.
Yes.
And one of the things that, if you've been to a hospital and had an operation in the last, it's probably 20 years now, maybe more than that,
Mm-hmm.
the technology that keeps the air clean in operating rooms really came out of work that was done in the space program. And you find that everywhere. And of course, on the space station, there's a great many experiments that have to do with medical issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into some of the fun stuff about the memories of your career. And I'm going to walk over here, Marty, so you can zoom in on the easel, as I'm going to take off Mr. There you go. You can point out some things. There is you came to Kennedy Space Center in 1975 permanently, right?
Right.
And so that was before the bicentennial of our great country. And show us, tell us what's going on there and the role that you played in getting that beautiful Saturn V under a building.
Well, and that's interesting from the standpoint that one of the women I worked with actually probably did as much or more than anybody in getting that Saturn V.
What was her name?
Right here. Well, we talked about that with her, as a matter of fact, and she said, "Don't start naming people because you will forget
Okay.
a lot of them," and that's true.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's another reason that I'm really proud of NASA, is the advances they've been able to not pioneer entirely, but to make in in treating women and all minorities as equals. It's
one of the most diverse organizations on Earth.
That's right.
And 41 nations can claim they have had a human go to space. And we've talked to all of our friends. Marty Winkle's brought in some of our African American friends that worked out there and so forth. Yeah, it's not all been peaches and cream for everybody, but by and by, everybody knows they had a job to do, and race,
And,
sex didn't mean anything about it, did it?
No, and in any case, you can see here what are geodesic domes, and those all housed various exhibits, some NASA exhibits, but also, because this was really a World's Fair in one way, is that they had all sorts of things for people to look at. Now, the Saturn V that was lying here was going to fly as the mission after Apollo 17, but we never got to that because the program was ended. And so this laid here ever since the Apollo program up through the bicentennial, and corroded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and rusted, and was weathering.
Apollo 18, Saturn V there.
And I used to kid, I forgot his name, that's terrible, the astronaut who was supposed to be the commander, who never got to fly to the moon. He kept saying that we, no, well, it'll come to me, but I'm old enough now to be in a museum, so and so I don't remember names as much as I should.
Jack Lausma, wasn't.
But in any case, this had been passed on the tours, and then even after the bicentennial, remained there for a number of years until we were able to progress in our visitor program to where the person who we had selected to be in charge of or to operate that was able to get together the money to build the Saturn V Center.
Mm-hmm.
And once that was decided, then something had to be done to make this ready for a museum. And one of the impetuses to the Saturn V Center was to get that inside, out of the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women who worked for me, who started in the secretarial pool
Mm-hmm.
here at Kennedy, where probably 90% of the women had to start, was in charge of overseeing the contract to refurbish that.
Mm-hmm.
And did a fantastic job.
Oh yeah,
And
what a
it's-
centerpiece, and too bad the pandemic, they're not driving out there right now with buses,
Yes,
but
the
hopefully that'll go on there. Let
and
me
it-
walk up here to help change a little bit there. There you've got one of the gantries, and of course that's the bicentennial logo of America, or in 1976.
Right.
And for those of you that don't know, that is the largest painted American flag anywhere, and the stars, the blue area where the stars and stripes are, is the size of a basketball court, right?
that's right.
In there.
That is a big flag.
A big flag, yes. And now the NASA meatball is over here on there. Hugh, while we're talking about it, what the meatball and the worm? What's your opinion of the NASA meatball and the worm? The meatball being the regular logo of NASA with the vector, and the worm is NASA scripted out, sort of.
Well, yeah, and that was supposed to be more modern and up to date.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very unhappy with that because I was good friends with the person who created the meatball,
Oh.
who was Jim Mottarelli at the Lewis Research Center. He was in charge of the photography and the art that had to be done, and was a great guy, and he created that of course, very early in the program. And
From 1975 to 92, I think they had the meatball. That was when you came on, they changed it then.
No, I came on in '63.
No, I'm talking about
oh.
at KSC. Year
Oh,
75
well, KSC.
is when they went to the worm.
And we were very pleased when the administrator, the new administrator at the time, went to the Langley Research Center, which was always known as Mother Langley, because it was the first research center of the NACA group. Langley, Lewis, and Ames were the research centers for NACA. And he was talking to all of the workers there, and he said, "What can I do to help all of you?" And a bunch of them said, "Get rid of the worm and bring back the meatball." And so he did.
Huh.
And and he would come down here, and he would go to all the centers, and he would look around to see that where there were any worms
That was who?
on buildings and stuff.
What?
And he would carefully tell the center director, "I want those all changed back to the meatball." And but anyway,
Which administrator
I
was that?
digress.
Bridges?
No, he was never an
I
administrator.
mean, he was a KSC director.
Yeah, I want to say Fletcher, but
Golden.
it wasn't.
Golden
I think it
changed
was Golden.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, we want to show kind of where your work area was. We got some other
Okay.
pictures here. But
And-
this is here's the pad out there,
Right.
and this is the famous clock, the countdown clock with the flags. And here's all your media
right
over
here
there.
is
We're going to
the-
talk about
You
some
can
of those.
sort of barely see that.
Yeah.
Now, and this is a dome from the bicentennial.
This is a 1992 picture
right.
we set up.
When we started the shuttle program, there was no building here. I think this building existed.
Let's look at some of these older ones here. Then you can get. We found some of these in our stuff. There you go. There's the clock and the flag, and pad 39A would be over there. So here you see when they got rid of the dome, and that view there. You were going to show us on this one.
Well, we can use either one.
Yeah, let's
So
there.
this was the new building that took the place of the dome. This is NBC and CBS and ABC. What we encouraged,
Let me look at, and here's a photo of it looking from the other direction there, Hugh. And now we can see the CBS eye on there, I think.
right, and this was
NBC, CBS, ABC.
and this was a big a covered area where the press could sit. During Apollo, during the early Apollos, we had thousands of press here at the Kennedy Space Center. And as a matter of fact, for the first space shuttle launch, we had over 2,000 press. And then and that continued for quite a long time. And then by the time we got to the Challenger launch, which was the 25th, I think, 25th launch,
Yes, sir.
it had gone down to only 500.
500 from 2,000 media requests, and that's interesting.
Well, people showing up. There were
Yeah.
a lot more requests, people who didn't show up. But in any case, the news media were allowed to construct their own buildings.
Oh, okay.
And the ABC was one of the last ones to be built as far as the major networks. And that got built backwards so that instead of looking toward the pads, it looked away from the pads. And when some of our workers were coming to work once, they looked at that and they said, "Do they know what they're doing?"
Did they?
And they had to actually pick up part of the structure of that and turn it around so it looked in the right direction. But
Holy
anyway,
cow.
that's
Legendary buildings there, particularly the
Probably-
Apollo era, and all the wonderful reporters we talked about.
well, and Jules Bergman was ABC guy,
Mhm.
and I can't remember whether I was the one who told him that or not, but but he was one of the real characters of the press.
Bergman was?
Yes.
Character in what way? Just
Well, he was a good reporter, and good reporters do whatever they need to do to get the story. Well, I can't remember what which launch it was, but it was one of the Apollos, and it had been scrubbed, and he jumped in his car and was going off out of the center and was several miles up the road when all of a sudden they decided they would go ahead and launch.
oh,
And he turned around and came zipping back, but because of all the crowds, he had to drive in the area between the two roads, and in order to get back to the press site.
Jules Bergman.
Yeah. Well, and he he also could be a pain. When we had I was fortunate enough to be the first NASA person who was allowed to go speak to, I think it was AIAA meeting about Challenger, and he insisted on wanting to go back to the Mercury capsule that sank because Carpenter was there, and insisted on asking questions that had nothing to do with
about Grissom's
yeah,
the hatch blowing on the Mercury and it's sinking.
right,
And
yeah, Grissom.
Carpenter was there, and he was.
And but in any case, there are many stories about him. But one of the things which I'll talk about whenever you'd like is the way we really looked on the news media as being, terribly important to the agency.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody looked on them that way. As a matter of fact, some people got really unhappy with the news media.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the, in the case of Jules, in his later years, he had, I can't remember whether it was cancer of the brain. In any case, he had a couple of serious operations,
Mm-hmm.
and had lost the ability to do the sort of stand-up reporting that television people do,
Mm-hmm.
and was no longer able to do that. And we used to very carefully, take him out and spend an hour while he tried to do a 1 or 2 minute spot.
Mm.
But later on, ABC decided they no longer were going to send him down here. And what I did was created a spot in the firing room for a pool reporter, and asked him if he would like to take that spot, which what a pool reporter does is that they witness whatever is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Since not all the reporters can be there, then they come back and report to the other reporters what they saw. We did a lot of that during the Challenger accident, where we couldn't send all the reporters, which again were in the thousands,
Mm-hmm.
out to look at the recovery ships and that sort of thing. So we would have the reporters reporting to the reporters on what they saw.
Pool photographers and pool reporters, too.
That's right.
They would
And
choose,
in the case of pool photographers, they shared pictures, and
Mhm.
the pool reporters shared information.
Very interesting.
but-
Let's talk about a couple other greats that you knew well, Walter Cronkite and Jay Barbary. Let's talk about the great Walter Cronkite and your dealings with him.
Well, Walter didn't come down. I mean, Walter came down quite a lot during the Apollo program, and then less and less as other reporters came and did the job for them. But Walter probably is best remembered for the first Saturn V launch. And on the first Saturn V launch, nobody really knew exactly what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the shock wave, and this was before we had the big buildings that the various networks had.
Mm-hmm.
And he had sort of a plywood shack type of thing in which with a big picture window. And during the Saturn V launch, the shock wave from the engines sort of made loose or caved in the picture window that he was looking out. So he had to do his broadcast holding up the window while he talked. And
he was quite excited about it too, for
well,
sure.
he probably was.
Yeah,
but
I remember that.
He reported calmly.
Yeah.
But but anyway, I think, you know, looking at the press in terms of sort of the celebrity news people is the wrong way to look at it, because we considered the press, you know, an important part of our jobs. Our job in public affairs was to tell the world, you know, what was happening and what was in the agency and what the purpose was of what they were witnessing. And the only way to do that is through the news media. So the news media really, you know, were a conduit, and as a result, we felt that they really were sort of a part of the family in those times. Now that unfortunately has not continued in the same way, and some people say, oh, they're only looking for sensational stories. That's not true. You were a news person, I was a news person, and what we were trying to do was convey to whatever audience we had as to what were the facts. And they, unfortunately, in cable television today, a lot of things get done in a way that they appear to be news, but they're actually more opinion than just
Shake
the
my
facts.
head, always injecting their opinions or whatever in things.
But in any case, one of the things that I and the other people that worked at the press site did, in particular Dick Young and Eddie Harrison, was helped create a program to actually honor the
show that
the
there.
news people.
This is Hugh Harris's baby here, the Chroniclers. Quite a significant story here. Share what's been created there at your urging.
Well, what we did was we wanted to recognize what the contributions were. And I went to NASA headquarters and I said, I think this would be a good idea for the agency to do. And the headquarters, whoever was in charge at the time, said, well, it's a pretty good idea, but why don't you do it down there? So what I did then was said that in order to, and what the way we honored them was and you can see a little bit of the wall at the press site here.
Now, which building is this at?
This is
KSC?
it's in the press site, main press site building.
Okay.
Is that we have actually, I think about, probably close to 100 names now of news media
I'll open that
people.
for you there. And in this booklet here, it chronicles the different news people. There's Rudy Abramson starts out alphabetically there. Okay.
Yes, we tried to do it alphabetically.
Tried to do it alphabetically,
then I gave them a choice usually of whether they wanted to write their own or I would write it. So a lot of these I wrote.
There's Howard Benedict.
Yeah, Howard Benedict
One of
was
the greats of
Associated Press. And he, of course, ended up being very involved in the space camp and the Hall of Fame and that sort of thing too.
There's Jules Bergman we were talking about earlier
Right.
there.
And
What a wonderful legacy for these gentlemen. And women too, I was saying.
well, there's some pretty interesting women in there. The three women reporters who were most prominent during the early days were Sue Butler, who became Sue Butler Hannafin, Mary Bubb, and Mercer Livermore King, and who was married to the king that the King Road is named after in Cape Canaveral.
There's Mary Bubb wearing one of her famous hats, I guess.
Yes, Mary Bubb was known for having a different hat for every major launch.
Okay.
And which became very outrageous. And what she also was known for, to those of us who knew her pretty well, was that for her parties, and which she had at her home in Cocoa Beach, and would invite everybody after a major launch to come. And but before she issued the invitation, she would tell the public relations people that were here from companies like RCA and Lockheed and whoever the contractors were, that she expected them to show up with the food and the drink and everything for that. She was not, prone to doing a lot of cooking.
Mary Bubb was the first woman reporter to cover the space program. What's more, she did it from both a popular standpoint and technical perspective by reporting for wire services and publications such as the Electronic News.
Yeah, she was a very interesting person in that she really got started pretty much in working for publications that covered the technical issue as opposed to sort of the people thing. But she was a wonderful woman who unfortunately has passed away.
We sold some of her things at an auction. That's how I got to know who she was, and there were some interesting things that was in her collection. Some books from, I think in her collection was Jim Irwin had signed. She had a bunch of books of Jim Irwin, Apollo 15 astronaut, and there's Chuck Hollinshead.
Yes.
Chuck there, who was also a voice of NASA that I omitted from this. We're going to talk about here in a minute, but what a neat idea there. What a booklet there? Is this for sale? Is it downloadable? Is it online?
No, actually, it was really it was printed by NASA, and I don't think that it has been reprinted since I retired.
Chroniclers, the Chroniclers, recording history, and this is in Hugh's NASA history. It does give you a big pat on the back for doing this, Hugh, and as a legacy to
thank you.
The journalists brethren.
Well, let me mention one other woman reporter who I think is pretty interesting. Sue Butler Hannafin was born. Sue Butler was born in Vienna, Austria. There she is right there. And she was I believe, I can't remember whether it was a duchess, but anyway, she was born into a sort of a regal family, and but she was Jewish. And this was at a period when the Nazis took over Austria, and she was taken by her father to Poland, and unfortunately that was not the best move in the world, but she was smuggled out of Poland by a group who rescued a lot of the younger children of the Jewish faith and taken to England. Well, I think they ended up, but they walked for days and days to get to a port where they got on a ship and were smuggled off to England. And when she got to England, the English program to accept the refugees gave her gave the people a choice. They could go to work on the farms or various other, depending on their skills, or they could go to a university if they qualified for that. And she qualified for that, and I can't remember the name of the university, but she was recruited by the OSS.
King's College of Aberdeen University.
Right, and in any case, the OSS, and she spoke a number of languages, ended up parachuting into France, helping the resistance against the Germans, and smuggling people, American paratroopers who, got probably their plane shot down to get out of the country and back to England. So she had she was a very resourceful and powerful woman as far as what she wanted to have accomplished, she was going to accomplish.
Award-winning. Her husband, Chris Butler, was also a space writer. It says here that she, interesting story that is written here, on occasion, Sue Butler would resorted to asking her press conference questions in German or French, depending on the subject's mother tongue. This galled other reporters who couldn't eavesdrop. Sue, speak English, Howard Benedict, longtime Associated Press reporter, would then shout out at her.
Well, reporters have to resort to a number of mechanisms in order to get the story. And they want the story first, and they want it exclusively if possible. Now, Jay Barbary, who worked for NBC for more than 50 years, was one of the best at that. And he had really a network of people that he knew who worked out at the center, which he became friends with, and was able to hear sort of what was happening before it happened. Now, in one case, he also just happened to be in a restroom at the Air Force Station when there was a launch that was going to go off, and the commander and somebody else walked in, and he heard them coming, put his feet up, and listened, and discovered what the launch was all about. Because in those days, launches, especially if they were military, were basically secret. And so that was one thing he did. The other thing he did during the Challenger accident, he was the reporter who broke the story of what had happened to the Challenger that caused the accident. And the way that he got that story was that among the friends that he had made was a person that you all probably can remember, named Sam Bedingfield.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Sam
Sa-
Bedingfield, one of the godfathers of this museum, in fact.
That's right. And passed away, which was very sad. But in any case, Sam had just retired just before the Challenger accident, and Jay called him and said, "Sam," he said, "I imagine that you would be interested in wandering around the center." And Sam said, "Well, I still have a badge," and finding out what really happened here, and Sam did indeed wander around the center and see his old friends, and found out about the O-ring problem, and called Jay and said, I've got it. And Jay said, and Sam said, "What do you want me to do?" He says, "Well, I want you to agree to work for NBC at the moment, and not tell any other reporters of this until I'm able to get on the air and broadcast it." And Sam had a son-in-law, or a son, can't remember now. I think it was a son-in-law.
Son-in-law, yes.
Who worked for the Orlando Sentinel, at least most recently. And he said, "Well, I've got to tell him." And Jay says, "It's okay if you tell him after the 6 o'clock news when I get on the air." He said he can't use the story until it gets in the paper tomorrow morning. So you really won't be doing anything wrong, other than if he had told the son-in-law probably would have shared it with Associated Press also.
Right.
So anyway, that was one way that Jay got his stories.
Talking about Jay Barbary, and for our viewers' benefit, Sam Bedingfield was he was NASA badge number 4 at NASA. The first 20 guys did it alphabetically, and we miss Sam Bedingfield. What a force he was at this museum, and his daughter and actually his grandson are very involved with our museum here.
A great family.
Yes, they are. I came, like I said, 3 years ago. Never met him. He passed away, I think, in 2012. But yes, he was quite an interesting gentleman. Well, that's interesting. Jay Barbary having his own little stringers out there, right?
Right,
and to tell him the news.
He knew all of the astronauts, and made a point of having a bite with them or a drink, and as a result, and actually was friends. So Jay has written 10 books, 4 of them being at least New York Times bestsellers, and one's like let me think now. The one that is always comes to mind is Neil Armstrong, A Life of Flight.
Yes.
And after Neil passed away, John Glenn called him and said, "Jay, you have got to write a book about Neil Armstrong. If you don't do it, nobody will." Now, Neil had already had done a book with a history professor, and I think it was called First Man.
Right, yes, the First Man movie based on that.
But
too.
It was, very academic, and really didn't capture the personality of Neil and the humanity of Neil. And one of the stories that I think was only in Jay's book had to do when Neil was a fighter pilot, and which must have been during the Korean War, and came up up a mountain, and on top of it, the soldiers were exercising out in the field, and he could have mowed them all down, but he didn't want to do that. I mean, they were, they weren't exactly in a dogfight
Right.
at the moment. So, so he, turned and went off.
Huh.
And I think that was at the time they had strung huge steel cables between hills and mountains, and one of them caught his wing and sheared off some of that, and he had to do an emergency landing. He was, able to get away and be recovered, and the otherwise history would have not happened the way that it did.
Well, we're talking with Hugh Harris, one of the voices of NASA, and some of the stories he had with his friend Jay Barbary, who lives here on the Space Coast, and you talk to every day, you said.
Well, every few days.
Every few days on there. And like everybody that's getting into their 80s, like you, sir, it's, you got to keep in touch with each other because, it's our mortality, isn't it?
Well, that's why I'm here. I'm at an age where I can be in a museum. And so I hope,
oh, yes, you're one of our favorite national treasures, Hugh Harris. You really are.
I hope you can invite me back in 12 years when I officially will become an antique.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. We will do that. You reach that age. Couple things. We've had some of the readers chime in. Marty Winkle, my co-producer and cameraman there, he looked up Apollo 18, that is the Saturn V that's at the Saturn V building at KSC. And Marty, you found that Dick Gordon was going to be the commander of that.
Yeah, that's who it was.
With the Apollo 12 Earth orbiter, Dick Gordon. Gordon was going to finally get to walk on the moon with Vance Brandt.
Yep.
When Vance Brandt would have been the command module. Yeah. And Schmidt and Gordon were going to walk on the moon. And then, of course, Harrison Schmidt bumped one of my favorite guys, Joe Engle, from 17.
I'm very unhappy with that. Well, I'm not really unhappy with
Harrison Schmidt going to the moon. Jack.
But I felt badly about Joe Engle, who, of course, was an X-15 pilot.
Yes. And, the only human, Hugh, to go to space in two returnable spaceships, the X-15 and the Shuttle. I'd love to meet him. He's 88, and a true national hero in my mind.
Yeah, well, and a really fine person. So I felt badly when he got bumped. But
now the story that goes around that I've told, and correct me if I'm telling a bad story, was that Deke Slayton over the astronaut course says, "Look, we're bumping you from a moonwalk, but you can be on any of the 3 Skylabs." Or the Apollo Soyuz test project. And Joe Engle says, I don't want to do any of those. I want to fly a plane. I'll wait around for the shuttle, which he did, and of course was in the alt tests with the approach and landing tests in there. Is that did you ever hear any of that about him being offered to fly in the Apollo command modules on Skylab or ASTP, but he said he wanted to fly a winged plane.
Yeah, I knew he liked to fly, but that I hadn't heard that.
Reporter, comparing our notes here. There, not that I heard that firsthand, but let's. Do you remember? We've got. We have a question.
Robert Law.
Robert Law. We've got a guy in Scotland. Hi, Robert. He's going to bed right now.
Hey, Robert.
And we've got another gentleman in New Zealand that's waking up to us, Dean Salazar. Up there, so this is quite an amazing thing, our Facebook and our Stay Curious program. But Robert Law's asking, do you remember BBC correspondent Reg Tumble?
Turnell.
Turnell?
Yeah, no, Turnill.
Okay.
Turnell, and his
You
wife,
do remember
wife,
him,
Margaret.
obviously. To spell
Oh,
his name
he
correctly.
was a great friend.
Uh-huh.
As a matter of fact, I had a chance because of him to go to England and speak at a conference that BROP held.
Oh.
Now, the British, like NASA, puts initials on everything.
Okay.
And BROP stands for British Rocket Oral History Program.
Okay, drop.
And the reason that it was created was that during World War II, the scientists and engineers were not able to publish papers about what was being done in the technology area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they formed a thing where they talked to each other. And then after, of course, wasn't there during World War II because I was only 9 when that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I did get a medal for collecting newspapers.
Oh, okay. Good.
But in any
Did
case,
your part?
Reg was a major contributor to BROP, and as a result of him, I was invited to come and speak, and then I was invited to come back again when Reg was really retiring and being honored by BROP to help present the award to Reg.
Sweet.
But he was his wife Margaret was really the only woman that we regularly accredited to come to the press site who was not really a reporter.
Oh.
So don't tell anybody.
No,
that.
we won't tell you.
And she used
Goodness
to.
knows somebody that's just a.
But she did make notes for him if he was tied up with something, and made tea for Reg, and also for some of the other people there, and was delightful to have around.
Sounds such interesting personalities you're around all the time. It's like, so she literally got to carry his notebook, because you and I know me as a photographer, when I was going to do an event and told someone, oh, can I carry your camera bag with you? You know,
Right.
Get me in free, like that'll get you in front. I said, no, we got to get credentialed and all that stuff. Don't. But that's just wonderful. There you go, Robert Law. How that makes me think about how the European press and maybe even the Asian press that you dealt with, and let's talk the Shuttle, because that was the meat of your career there. 40 years ago, in April, we're going to be celebrating STS-1, so maybe we'll get you involved with the celebration here. But what was the European press attitude about NASA and the American space program?
Well, I think that they were very pleased. I know Reg, that we mentioned before, was pretty unhappy that the British had not had a strong astronaut-oriented program, and so they played sort of a minor part. Now, one thing I might mention in talking about the British was they did contribute a number of people to the program, to the NASA program. And John Tribe, who you know very well,
Yes, we do.
is one of those people. He came out of I think it's called Blue Streak program, which was sort of the British Atlas type rocket program, and ended up here being working on atlases on I think pad 12 originally, but and you might ask him about this sometime. I think that he probably saved the a possible disaster happening when we got to the launch of John Glenn on Atlas. But anyway,
How
that's,
John Tribe saved? What role did he play in that?
well, he discovered a major problem with the Atlas when he was working on it, that then they were able to solve, which, if I recall properly, and I may not remember it exactly right, found that moisture was getting into the nose cone area, or wherever you might have a satellite or a spacecraft, and that could then freeze from the liquid oxygen and cause a major problem. Now, I may not have that all entirely right, because I talked to him about that quite a long time ago, but he was one of the heroes.
He's been a great supporter of our museum. He was on John Tribe, we're talking about. Rockwell was his contracting company, working on the RCS thrusters on the command module. And John Tribe, we just put his oral history, our Stay Curious program, up on our American Space Museum YouTube channel. Our IT manager, Bruce Jacobs, has just got our YouTube page just looking awesome, and we'll be putting you up there too when this is done, so people that don't do Facebook can see our Stay Curious programs with this conversation. And this conversation with Mr. Hugh Harris, who is one of the voices of NASA. And let's talk about your predecessors there. Some very interesting people there that became known as the voice of NASA, because you were on the intercom system and with the television feeds, talking about what was going on. And one of them was, by the way, of course I missed Chuck Hollinshead. All right, we showed a picture of him earlier, but he's not on there, and he preceded you down here in this classic photograph of you taken just a few years ago.
Quite a few years ago.
Me being a baby boomer, three of these guys were born in Ohio. All right, so us Buckeyes like that. Only Jack King was born in Boston, Massachusetts. But the first guy I remember as a kid in the Mercury astronauts being my hero, and he was called the 8th astronaut, John Anthony Powers, whose nickname was Shorty, because he's 5'6". I don't know in politically correct world today if Shorty would get played very well as a nickname for a person, a man or a woman, I don't know. But he was quite a character, I understand, and was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and a war veteran. And did you ever get to meet Shorty Powers or know him?
Yes. Well, I didn't know him real well. I did get to meet him and talk to him a bit. And he I think did a good job. One of the things which all of these people recognized, including Chuck and myself, was that our job was to keep the reporters and the public up to date with what was happening in real time, but not to talk over any of the operational people who were on the consoles and doing the actual job of launching something. And that is not always practiced in recent years, which I get very unhappy with. But because it's become a little bit more of a TV show sort of approach. But if you ask reporters, and I can't emphasize enough that the best way to work with the media, or for anybody else at that moment, for that matter, is to listen to them and to ask, what do you need to do your job? And I think, that's sort of a key in whatever area you work in, because, listening to other people is probably, and especially for politicians, but for anybody, is probably the most important thing and the most productive thing that you can do. So in the case of all the news media, that has been sort of the watchword that I tried to emphasize. And it wasn't just me. All of the people that I worked with at the time recognized that they had a job to do, and our job was to help them do their job. And I think that's true wherever you are, whether you're a volunteer here at the Space Museum or you're working in a machine shop or whatever it is.
Great points there. Talk a little bit about Paul Haney there. He's from Akron. He was the public affairs officer and the voice of the Gemini in some of the Apollo era. He lived to age 80. I think he passed away about 10 years ago. He was an AP reporter, typical news guy, but he pioneered a system of reporting NASA's events as they happen, providing real-time information to the public and news media covering the space. And his first one was Gemini 3. So what a little bit about Paul Haney?
Well, he was the one that I knew the least, although actually a Gemini flight or launch was the rocket that I was closest to at the time it launched, other than little rockets.
Right.
But
Titan II rocket.
Yeah, I had mentioned before Gordon Harris, who was the director of public affairs here at the time I joined NASA.
And he was under Kurt Debus, you said.
Right.
Gordon
and,
Harris. No relation, I guess.
No, there was no. Well, there was a relation, but not a blood relation.
Okay, all right.
Because he owned the newspaper that I worked on in New Jersey.
Right. Okay.
Although he actually wasn't active in that, and I didn't meet him until I joined NASA. He had sold the paper; he just hadn't been paid for it. So theoretically, he still owned it. But anyway.
Seemed to be a true pioneer of the whole
But
thing.
As a result, when I came down here from Lewis, which in the early days was primarily because the Lewis Research Center was responsible for a number of the rockets that were used, the Atlas Agena, the Thor Agena, the Atlas Centaur, and some other cats and dogs. But anyway, I was here. I wasn't actually working a Gemini launch, but there was one that occurred while I was here. And I decided, well, I'm going to go take a look at this. So I started, I figured there was some place along the way to the pad where I could appropriately stop. So I started coming to guards, and the guard would look at my badge and say, "Yes, sir, Mr. Harris, go right ahead." Well, they, thought that I was Gordon, and pretty soon I was getting close. I thought, I'm getting too close to this pad. So I pulled over, and the launch went on time, luckily, and but I was much closer than I should have been, and it was because of the name.
Yeah. Cool. Do you have a camera with you?
No.
No, you're a writer.
Well, I was a photographer too, but
And the great Jack King, of course, there, the public affairs officer, best known for his work during he worked all the three programs, but he was the announcer for the Apollo 11 launch, and which earned him the name the Voice of Apollo. And his well-known commentaries have been used all over. And this was an interesting thing. In 2011, NASA included his launch of Apollo 11 voice on a ringtone. You would get a ringtone and have Jack King saying, you know, Apollo 11 has left the pad, or whatever his famous words were there. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Jack King.
well, Jack was a very interesting person, and and very likable. He also played poker, and with Jay Barbary.
Oh, okay.
They,
Some good stories there, I'm sure.
yeah, and I probably don't know all of them, but in any case, what I remember him the best for, and occasionally talk to him about it, was that his mantra was if he told the wire services a story, that it then went to everybody. When we morphed, luckily, into where we had long call-out sheets, so that when something was happening, we not only called the wires, but we called all the individual reporters. And that was important during the time that I was down here. I think in making sure that they were all apart, and we're sure that they were going to not be forgotten. Nowadays, the use of the internet has changed that a lot, which I don't think has really done as good a job as the personal contact is concerned. But it's a different world, and but in any case, Jack was a lot of fun to be with, and he and his wife Evelyn, played a big part in what was happening in the Cocoa Beach area for the years. And of course, he went off to both to Houston for a while, and also had a job, and I forgot now. He worked for one of the billionaires who had race horses, and they forgotten now who that was. But in any case,
Jack King, you can get his voice on your ringtone, apparently, of him announcing the Apollo 11 launch. And we didn't, Chuck Hollinshead, like you said, was another one that kind of mentored you. And then we've got you in there from STS-1 up to about STS-95. Before 95, you said you retired. You became the voice of NASA. And one of the PR pieces written about you says, although Hugh Harris is best known to the public for his calm, professional commentary on the progress of launch preparations and the launch of a space shuttle, Hugh's primary accomplishments were in directing an outreach program to the general public, news media, students and educators, as well as business and government leaders. You put your stamp all over the place there.
Well, that's what public affairs is about.
That's right, exactly.
And and each of those areas are really important for NASA to stay in touch with, especially the educational area. And I don't know whether how many young people listen to your video casts, but I hope that the thing that they take away is that it's really important to take advantage of whatever opportunities they have to work in a wide variety of fields. It's, I mean, a lot of people, I think today, get sort of into are more, I guess, parents oversee their children a lot more than they used to, and as a result, they don't have as many experiences as they might, but some of which might not be the best ones for them to have.
Yes, right.
But
yeah, there's.
It's, but I think it's really important. I was very fortunate to being able to start in radio when I was 9 years old, and just about the time I started making crystal radio, and that proved to be one of the things that led to was my first civil service job I got when I was 18. I think I mentioned I had to work full time while I went to school, and I was working at a radio broadcast school when I got out of high school. I got out when I was 17, and got a call from the Veterans Administration, and I just happened to be the one who answered the phone. And they said, would you have anybody there who would be interested in applying for the job of a radio broadcast specialist? And I said, well, I know one person that I think would be really good. So I gave them a little resume of me and went out to try and get the job. And they interviewed me and said, well, you have the qualifications that we need, but I don't think the Civil Service Commission will believe at 18 that you had all this experience. So I went back out to catch the bus, because I didn't drive at that time. And I'm sitting there, and they run out and said, do you by any chance know how to run projectors? And I said, I've been a paid projectionist for 4 years. And it was because I actually was a paid projectionist in the high school. And they said, come with us. And I got hired as a civil servant when I was 18 at a veterans hospital, and had the opportunity to actually live out there because it was somewhat remote while I was going to my first year in college.
Teenage entrepreneurs, I'm telling you, we did what we could.
But taking, advantage of whatever is open is really important.
Great advice, Hugh. Exactly. Today's, because one thing leads to another, and that's maybe one of the lessons of growing older. As you look back at the forks in the road, like you had many, what would have happened had you gone to the bank and worked for the financial that offered you?
I would have been rich.
You'd have been rich. Yeah. Yes, that's something about the news media there. It's not a pathway to riches for sure, but we're very involved in the whole thing in there. We've had a great time here talking to you, and wanted to wind down with a couple things with Hugh Harris here, a real legend of NASA public affairs. You saw some 90 shuttle launches in your career there. We're looking at the 40th anniversary of the space shuttle being launched. What is the big takeaway now that we're 10 years behind that all being over with? How will it be looked at in history?
Well, I think that it was a great innovation in the space program. It was the first time that we built something, or a flying machine or into space, that could be used for constructing a huge complex up there. which is the space station. And Bob Cabana, who I think you mentioned earlier, was on the first flight to actually attach two things together to start the construction of the space station.
Exactly, yes.
And
He and Kirchhoff turned the lights on to the Unity and Destiny modules.
well,
The Unity and Zvezda model of the Russians, yeah.
in any case, there were some problems, and we didn't, and I don't think we'll get to them today, as far as the shuttle was concerned, which led to the Challenger accident. But it was a big advance in the way that you do work in space, and not only a learning experience for how you work in space, but provided a national laboratory to do thousands and thousands of experiments that have great relevance to what of things we need to do here on Earth.
Well, we've had a long conversation with you, and that's great because we've got a lot of fans that'll be popping in and out of there. But when we talked earlier, you wanted to share a little bit about the NASA's nuclear frontier and how maybe we may have missed the boat by not promoting nuclear propulsion.
Well, I don't know whether you want to show this, but
sure.
What this is a paper about the work that was being done at NASA's Lewis Research Center, which had another area called Plumbrook Station that was near Sandusky and, by the way, Cedar Point.
Yes.
But
the Blue Streak. The Blue Streak roller coaster.
Oh,
Cedar
well,
Point.
yeah.
Yes.
I was never on that one.
Oh, okay.
But I think that was later than. In any case, at the time, the country was looking at building nuclear rocket engines, and it was very feasible to do that. Now, the role that that Lewis and Plumbrook had in that particular program had to do with the problem of how do you protect the materials from the intense radiation that you get from a nuclear reactor long enough to have long-term journeys using a nuclear rocket engine, or even fairly short ones using a nuclear rocket engine. And it turns out that I feel closer to it than I probably, because I never was all that, I never got to work on it. But in the first month that I was at the Lewis Research Center, I went out to Plumbrook, which was part of it, and I was able to stand in the containment vessel where the nuclear reactor was, and beside a mock-up of a nuclear rocket engine, a NERVA engine.
NERVA, yes, that was the engine, yes.
You know, the thing I remember the most about that was not so much what the NERVA looked like, but the tremendous Shrenkoff blue radiation that you could see as you looked down into the to the water that was there to cool the research reactor. Now, research reactors are different from power reactors in that they're made so that you can put things into them to test them with their little tunnels through them and that sort of thing. Because of the radiation is different, you're able to use regular water to cool them rather than heavy water. And but the radiation makes an unforgettable blue glow that you never forget. Anyway, the research reactor was certified for use at the time that I joined NASA,
Mm-hmm.
and the program was canceled about 10 years later, but the nuclear reactor was decertified in the year that I retired from NASA.
That's an interesting quirk there. Yes, that is. That is interesting.
But anyway, the big advantage to nuclear rocket engines is that we're talking about year-long trips to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
With a nuclear rocket engine, that could be truncated down to months or a couple of months. That solves a whole lot of problems that have to do with the radiation exposure that the astronauts would get on such a trip.
Sure, yeah.
The other thing that we were looking at Lewis was nuclear jet engines that would be used in commercial aircraft. And at the time that I joined NASA, it would have been too heavy for the type of commercial planes we had at that time. But by the time we got to the 747, you crossed the threshold where a nuclear jet engine would be practical. And I'm not sure that people would have been happy about having nuclear engines flying all around the world. But in any case, in the case of nuclear rocket engines, I think that we should have continued that research. And I know that a number of the astronauts agree that, and also I'm told that is being looked at again at NASA headquarters. But I think it's a thing that we should have done long ago, and it hasn't happened yet.
Well, that's some interesting insight there, and we've been with Hugh Harris here for a while on our Stay Curious program. We're winding up here. Such an honor to talk to you, sir, and I just think of the hands that you've shaken all over your 50-year illustrious career, and the phone calls you've gotten in the middle of the night from a KSC director and S administrator saying, "Can't you do something about this reporter?" Because you had a few of those, I would say, right?
Oh, I imagine, but usually it wasn't the administrator who called. But your call from New Zealand reminded me that I used to get a lot of calls in the middle of the night from Australia, from a bar or some other place saying, tell us about this.
Oh, really? They had a phone there. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this. I certainly have. It's like I said, it's been an honor and a privilege for the American Space Museum. Hugh Harris here with us for an extended time, but well-deserved, because we could go on for another hour of stories with you, and hopefully we'll have you back. Thank you for supporting our museum and coming out here in the pandemic, and we're glad that you could share your story with us, Mr. Harris. Is there anything that you'd like to add as we're concluding here?
Well, keep doing the good work, and I am really proud of what you and everybody have been able to do with the museum. I think it's absolutely essential to educate people as to what has been done and what we're capable of doing in the future.
Well, thank you. You're welcome. And it's a great team that we have here. You talked to Karen Conklin, our leader here earlier today. She's been involved with this museum almost 20 years, 3 years as our executive director. And
well, she does a fantastic job. And of course, Charlie Mars, who I knew for many, many years, has also been a great
absolutely
leader
our
here.
chairman of the board and another godfather of our museum here. And we just appreciate the opportunity that you could share these stories with our audience out there. I'm sure many people have enjoyed it also. So Mr. Hugh Harris, we thank you for being part of Stay Curious. I'm Mark Marquette, and Marty Winkle and I will be here again tomorrow to end the week with another little story and a program to help us bridge the space between us. Thank you, Mr. Hugh Harris.
You're welcome.
Good health to you.